First of all, we know that the Caucasoid Jew did not come into Jewry or to pick up Hebrew until the 11th century, when their king at the time, the Ashkenazim and the Khazars, the whole tribe up there, they adopted Judaism. They had their choice between Islam and Judaism, and they took Judaism. There were no Caucasian Hebrews. The ones that they call the Falasha, or the strangers, they know to be the real ones. That's why they went on a sojourn, and Zionists went kidnapping them. And that's why you didn't hear about the fact that there were multiple suicides of those Ethiopian brothers and sisters, because none of them were accustomed to going to clean nobody's goddamn toilets. So with that pleasant little preamble, we will move forward and begin to dig apart the story of Exodus. Now, I want to say that if the gentleman from the Village Voice needs to go, you don't? Great. For nearly 2,000 years, Judaism and Christianity has propagated the lie that Genesis was about the creation of man in our world, and that Exodus was about the historic migration of Jews from Egypt. Again, the priestcraft of Judaism and Christianity undermines the truth about causation and creation. Now, if you really want to understand what I'm saying, I don't want to get too deeply involved for the brothers and sisters who might end up getting tape 4 before they get tape 1. Get tape 1 so that you can understand tape 4. Because all of Genesis, to capsulize, is nothing more than the story of how a son, the sun that we know as the sun that gives us our light, that helps us to keep and maintain our melanated consciousness, the sun, the creation of the sun, is all that the Bible is talking about, and its sojourn through the universe, and how life is formed upon it. When, after it cools after a couple of trillion years and becomes an earth, that's all it is. That's all it is, beloved brothers and sisters, and you out there in video land. Genesis has not a damn thing to do with a man called Adam or a woman called Eve, or God speaking in the Garden of Eden. And I'd like to know, like we said in tape 1, just who the fuck was there to listen to hear God say anything. And God said, and God said, and God looked upon it and it was good. So he was obviously getting some sort of verification from somebody to say, is this cool? Yeah. All right, well, we'll go with day 6. Get out of the storybook head. This is all about metaphysics, cosmology, and astrosophy. And we start to graduate and come out of the kindergarten bullshit Bible history and start elevating to the universal or universalities and the universities of consciousness out of the kindergarten mess that we're in right now. Genesis is another terminology for creation, and the entire book is devoted to it. Creation and involution are one and the same. Involution is the involving of the life principle in matter. Involution, that's what the first 7 days was, the involving of God upon itself, involving itself with itself, getting to know itself. Exodus is the life principle's exit from matter. So you're understanding that Genesis is the beginning of God beginning to contemplate its own beingness. And upon that contemplation, after assessing everything about itself, it began to contemplate on itself. That's why it said on the 7th day it rested. What did it do? It meditated upon itself. And right after Genesis, you see Exodus. One begins and deals with involution of God's mind, and then after you have gotten through the involutionary process, you then have the flood, which leads the outpouring of the Most High's selfness into Exodus, and how that spirit becomes trapped in matter, and how matter seeks, or how spirit seeks to spiritualize the matter that it becomes incarcerated within. This is considered evolution, and we said it was E-V-E-O-L-U-T-I-O-N. So the involutionary process is the Adamic phase. That's the phase when you start seeing the combination or the coalescing or the magnetizing or bringing together of all the incandescent gases that comprise matter on its highest, most refined form. And as that incandescent gas begins to form, it begins to coalesce into what then becomes solidified as light, or as a quantified light form, life form, light form. That life form, is the sun. As the sun begins its cooling process, it then cools and gets into the process that we are now going to involve ourselves in. The violent process. This is why God is so violent. This is why you see Jehovah, or that which they try to call Jehovah, or the Lord God of hosts of Moses, is so violent and such a son of a bitch. Because the truth about God is, it ain't the Father, a white man with a beard, waiting to get you into heaven. That's bullshit. God is violent, vicious, and don't give a shit whether you worship it or not. Man is the greater part of God. As a matter of fact, man is God folded over on itself. And until we realize that and take the responsibility for our own resurrection and evolution, and go out and try to civilize the world based upon logic, reasoning, and the meta-sciences that our ancestors left on the walls of Kemet and all over this planet and other planets that they're now finding in Mars, pyramids, on Venus. We were here before. That was our old neighborhood. We've been rushed out. We've been pushed out. And that particular thing you saw, that when they showed you in Genesis that from the rib of Adam came Eve, that just meant that the sun cooled and became the earth that you now are habiting. All right? This is considered evolution or evolution. First there is involution, then there is solution. What is that word sol we told you meant? Remember we spoke about the word sol. Sol. Did this guy ever exist? Never. First you get what's that word? The ion. We speak about the ion as an atomic component that is the life force that coalesces all matter into the composite that universal mind imagines of itself. And little components of that imagining becomes what we now find as consciousness exemplified. So when you start speaking about the different stages, first you have involution, which we spoke about being the 7 days. Then you have solution. Then you have evolution. Then you have devolution. This is the stage that we are in right now. We are in a mad devolutionary process. The human equation, the human experiment, this particular matrix within consciousness is now in a devolutionary spiral towards whatever the mindset that created this evolution is about to reap. You have devolution, then you have redemption. That's what they're talking about in the last book of the Bible when Jesus tells you that he was Lucifer. Then you have ascension. I think that's C-I-O-N. How do you spell ascension? A-S-E-N. What the heck? S-I-O-N. And then after that you have dissolution. This is when first thing that you have is the incandescent gas being pulled together in a point. This is that symbol that you see in the occult symbol of the circle with the dot. The circle with the dot signifies a point where God's mind begins to enter, or when God's dick begins to penetrate the virgin hymen of matter. This portion here is all of the potential essences of matter being coalesced to that point. It is the same symbol of the egg as well. It is a hermaphroditic symbol. It is the symbol of the sun, which is the masculine principle, entering, and it is also the symbol of the egg or the womb. Now, the virgin matter, or Virgin Mary, or Mar, being maritime, being the waters, coalesces to this point of urgency. And then that's where you get the symbol, the third meaning of the sun. Because in all occult books you will see that the sun, especially in the zodiac, is depicted as such. But that symbol has three meanings: involution, evolution, and dissolution, going back to the self. what you have is the drawing of the incandescent gases to create the life source that becomes the sun. The sun now goes into its own orbit around another sun. This is the prodigal son returning. Because after the sun cools, after something like 10 trillion years, then you have this boiling cauldron, this soup that was created over those trillion years, that becomes what is known as primordial earth. That's with the volcanoes and all the acid rain and so forth happening. Then the cooling process happens even further. And then after that happens, you have what is known as life, or what essentially is all of the organs or organisms, hello people, that now inhabit this particular consciousness planet, this little plan. It's a plan F. A little plan of God's mind that comes into being. So what you're having here is the coalescing of the incandescent gas, the time when the sun searches in itself in its loneliness. That's when Christ goes in for 40 days and 40 nights. And the beast keeps saying to him, well, do a miracle. All of these numbers, you notice that the Bible is very specific about its numbers. 7 comes up a lot, 12 comes up a lot, 4 comes up a lot. These are Kabbalistic numbers. We were talking about doing one on the Tetragrammaton, and we will do the Tetragrammaton. We will cover a Kabbalistic overview of the Bible as well. But when that coalescent incandescent gas begins to come together, creates the sun cools down into an earth, the earth goes through its particular devolutionary process, begins to implode on itself and becomes a moon. The moon that you see out there is much older than the earth is much older than the sun. Okay? That now, the moon, after its own orbit decays based upon this particular Earth now losing its ability to keep that particular spherical orb in orbit, there's crashing, there's madness happens, and then it breaks away to become either an asteroid or a comet. And then again, it breaks up even further to become part of the material that first created it, back into incandescent gas. That is all that the Bible is speaking about. That is all that the occultists are speaking about. Everything that you're talking about when they speak about Nibiru, when they speak about the Anunnaki, all of these people, this is what they're speaking about. Enki, Ebsu, Eo, all of these were the Babylonians' names for the different planets that were formed during the making of this particular solar system. Now, involution, solution, evolution, devolution, redemption, ascension, and then dissolution. This is the subject of the second book of Moses, of the Pentateuch. This being the subject, it is not about Jewish history. Exodus has nothing to do with Jewish history, so anyone who claims it, and it seems to me that Judaism seems to have taken from everyone that supposedly held them captive, in Babylon, in Egypt, in Sumeria, in Persia, every place they were held captive, they snatched the stories of the heroes and all the things that were done by heroic men and traditions and assigned it to themselves. Christians are so stupid they couldn't even make up their own goddamn religion. They had to adopt somebody else's. As a Christian, if you worship Jesus Christ, you worship a Jew. Now, if you don't understand that particular, and you think it's anti-Semitic, you can't be anti-Semitic because you're semi-black and semi-white just like everybody else. So the bullshit about anti-Semitism, that is a clock word to make sure that you get vilified by anybody, especially house niggas like Messy Jesse. Well, we can't be talking about things that have anti-Semitic. What the fuck is he talking about? You can't, that's that front. That's what Hitler and them did to make sure you weren't telling the truth. I have no such problem. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are the laws of Jewry, written by priests at least 1,000 years after the alleged life of Moses. So you have to understand that when they went into these different civilizations and snatched all the best that the civilizations had, they began to coalesce and know that with these stories and applying it to themselves, because if you understood the truth about the Bible, the Jews are nothing more than the elementals that go into making up the specific evolutionary process of all life. That's all they meant. But they were assigned this hero's mantle, God's favored, God's chosen people. That's bullshit, and you have believed that crap, and people have assigned whole historicities over to them. They have even stolen a whole fucking country from some people based upon what this goddamn book has said. Who but priests would write books on subjects such as Leviticus?